Judaism is opposed to both absolute bans on abortion as well as to unfettered access to abortion on demand. The Torah's position is more nuanced than either of these extremes, and we will see that sometimes not only is abortion permitted, it is required. In 1973, the United States Supreme Court's landmark decision of Roe v. Wade ruled that the Constitution guaranteed that each woman has the right to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy. Conservatives who opposed this decision continued over the decades to protest, to voice their opposition and disapproval, and patiently wait until this past year when a conservative majority on the Supreme Court reversed Roe v. Wade and ruled that the United States Constitution did not guarantee women the right to abort a fetus that they were carrying. And this stunning reversal, after 50 years, resulted in massive protests that are continuing to reverberate throughout the United States. Over the past decades, the two camps in this charged debate are usually identified as either pro-life or pro-choice. And as we will see, the traditional Torah perspective on abortion does not line up neatly with either of these perspectives. Judaism is opposed to both absolute bans on abortion as well as to unfettered access to abortion on demand. The Torah's position is more nuanced than either of these extremes, and we will see that sometimes not only is abortion permitted, it is required. One of the central sources on this topic in the Bible is actually a very difficult verse. And it really lies at the center of the historical difference between the way Judaism and the way the Catholic Church, as well as others in the Christian world, view the issue of abortion. The passage in question is the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verses 22 to 23. And it's almost impossible to simply read and understand easily. One possible translation, and it's hard to translate, but this is probably a very accurate translation. If men shall fight, talking about two men shall get into a fight, and a pregnant woman is struck, so she gets in the way, or one of them throws a wild punch, or one of them goes flying into this woman, and she miscarries. And the verse says, but there's no fatality. He shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if there shall be a fatality, then you shall give a life for a life. So how does Judaism traditionally understand this passage? We understand that verse 22 is describing a case where the woman survives after she miscarries, and the one who caused the miscarriage pays compensation for the lost fetus. But he is not executed as a murderer. The fact that his action led to the death of this fetus, he is not executed. He pays monetary compensation. In the next verse, verse 23, it teaches that if his action results in the death of the woman, this would be a capital crime, and he could face a death penalty. Now, the historical Christian understanding, going back to the earliest days of the church, the way they understand this passage is actually a misunderstanding based upon a mistranslation of the Septuagint. And there, in this Greek translation of the Hebrew phrase, "but there is no fatality," was rendered into Greek as, "and her child be born imperfectly formed." And this interpretation, it's not a translation, it's an interpretation. It distinguished between an unformed fetus and a formed fetus. And it regarded the killing of a formed fetus as murder, while the killing of an unformed fetus would not be considered as murder. Now, this distinction was accepted by the early church father Tertullian, and it was incorporated into canon law. Eventually, the distinction between formed and unformed fetuses was lost, and since 1588, the Catholic Church has considered causing the death of any fetus after its conception as murder. The life of the fetus is considered to be of equal value to any adult. Therefore, in the Christian tradition, the direct abortion of an infant, of a fetus, is never allowed, even if, by allowing the pregnancy to continue, both the mother and the child will die. The Church ruled, better 2 deaths than 1 murder. Now, according to Jewish sources in the Talmud, the status of full life only begins at birth. Prior to this, the fetus is regarded only as potential life. And the Mishnah, which is the foundation of the Talmud, teaches that if a woman is experiencing a difficult birth and her life is in danger, one should dissect the child inside her and extract the pieces. For her life takes precedence over the potential life of the fetus. However, the Mishnah teaches, once most of the child has already emerged, we do not touch it, for we do not push aside one life for the sake of the other. Again, once there's a birth, that child is considered to be a full-fledged human being, and we don't kill one human being to save another. But before the child is born, it's not considered a full-fledged human being. It is somewhat of a human being. It is certainly potentially a human being. And in a case where this potential life is endangering the life of the mother, we will sacrifice the potential life of this fetus in order to save the mother. However, the fact that a fetus is seen as potential life and not on the same level as humans after they've been born, this does not mean that a mother can choose to destroy the potential life for any reason. Even if we were to say that this potential life of the fetus, even if we were to say that it is her body, Judaism does not accept the ethos that it's my body and therefore I can do whatever I want with it. According to the Torah, one is not allowed to take one's own life. According to the Torah, one is not even allowed to harm oneself. We can't do whatever we want to with our bodies. But this is somewhat academic, because Judaism does not regard the fetus as simply part of the woman's body. On some level, the fetus is viewed as a full-fledged human being, on some level. However, not 100% full-fledged human being. It's sort of yes and no. In general, the fetus is regarded as a person, and it may not be harmed. We don't say it's the mother's own body, and she could do whatever she wants to it. The fetus, even though it's not a full-fledged human being, it is potentially a human being. And we view it, practically speaking, as somewhat of a person that we have no right to harm. As we saw, however, abortion would not be considered murder, warranting a death penalty. Because in the biblical case of causing a woman to miscarry, there's only a monetary payment. This is in the Bible. The person who causes the woman to miscarry, he's not convicted of a capital crime of murder. It's considered a form of murder. It's like murder, but because it is a fetus, it is not considered a full-fledged human being and a full-fledged murder. The sages even debate whether abortion is a biblical prohibition or a rabbinic prohibition. It's not entirely clear. Nevertheless, everyone agrees that one day the fetus is destined to become a full-fledged, bona fide human being. And so therefore, there must be an extremely compelling reason to terminate a pregnancy. In general, the only reason that would normally allow for an abortion is if the life of the mother is in danger. That is considered perfectly legitimate grounds for abortion. As the Mishnah taught, it is required to save the life of the mother if the fetus is posing a danger to her life. It's not simply that you may if you want to, you're required to abort that fetus. In such a case, the fetus is considered to be like someone attacking the mother, an attacker. The same way on the street. If someone attacks you on the street, threatening to kill you, you are allowed to kill them in self-defense. That's called a rodef, a pursuer. So the fetus is considered, if it's endangering the life of the mother, the fetus is considered like a rodef. And it's threatening the life of the mother, and therefore the fetus may be killed in self-defense. However, once most of the baby has emerged, its life is viewed as equal to the mother's life, and we cannot kill one to save the other. Now, when it comes to determining a mother's life and whether her life is in danger, her mental health is taken into consideration. It's not simply a determination made on physical danger, biological danger. Her mental state is taken into consideration when we evaluate whether this fetus is posing a threat to her life. If carrying the baby to term could cause the mother to become suicidal, this would warrant carrying out an abortion. Now, what if her mental state would deteriorate, but not quite to the point where she is becoming suicidal, but she's definitely highly thrown, agitated, really messed up by carrying this child. Her mental health is suffering terribly. So on this, there is a range of views among rabbinic scholars regarding other kinds of mental distress and whether they would be considered legitimate grounds for abortion. Cases of pregnancy that result as coming from a rape or incest, they would figure into these discussions. There is less room, however, to permit abortions in cases where the child will be born deformed or with a fatal illness, although among Torah authorities, among our sages, there are those that have lenient views in these cases as well.